Today we have a fascinating guest, Morgan Susan Taylor. Welcome, Morgan.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be on the roof with you.
Well, thank you. It's great to have you here. Morgan, you're a sex therapist, a licensed sex therapist, right?
A licensed professional counselor, and my specialty is sex therapy. So, correct, a sex therapist.
Okay. Can you describe to me like what that entails?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's in the mental health field, and a sex therapist is really just someone with specialized knowledge in the field of human sexuality. Mm-hmm. So it looks a lot like regular mental health counseling, but I get to talk about sex all day long with my clients and help my clients with sexually related challenges and issues.
Does that raise your or heighten your sensitivity towards your own sexuality when you're dealing with that topic all day, every day, or vice versa?
Yeah. It might have the opposite effect. I think I get kind of numbed out, but actually right? After a while, very little shocks me anymore.
Yeah, I bet. Is there a particular issue that you primarily deal with?
Well, yeah, so my specialty is women's sexuality and specifically low desire. So I work a lot with women and also couples who are experiencing the challenge or what I sometimes even call the myth of low desire, where the woman or the female partner in the relationship has shut down for some reason to sex, or is avoiding sex, or doesn't feel like sex, or has otherwise labeled herself as being a low desire woman. I mean, everybody's so different, right? So I really try to take time to get to understand their unique situation. But what I will say is most of the time, this whole idea of low desire it's usually not physiologically based, meaning for most women, at least in my practice, it's not necessarily related to hormonal changes. Now, for a woman who's going through menopause or is postmenopausal, that's a little bit of a different scenario. We know that the hormones do start to change, and that can definitely affect libido. But primarily, the women in my practice that I work with are premenopausal, some of them even in their 20s, where they've been diagnosed with low desire. They've even gone to see professionals, their OBGYNs, and been put on medications like testosterone, which is a popular kind of a newer treatment for low libido in women. They've been put on the female Viagra.
How does that work? Like, why would you want to give a woman testosterone? I think I know guys that did steroids because they were taking too much testosterone. In order to get testosterone to develop within themselves again naturally, they would go on estrogen.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it sounds all wacky and everything, but it's really playing with balances, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I don't actually know the whole physiology behind how it actually functions in the female body in terms of increasing libido. There's been a lot of success with the testosterone treatment in postmenopausal women with the libido. It tends to help because that is one of the sex hormones in women that it plays a role, and apparently it plays a big role in sexual arousal. However, in a younger woman who has potentially normal hormone levels, like there's nothing out of whack, being put on something like a hormone like testosterone or the female Viagra called Addy, and then there's another one that's a shot, Vyleesi, I think it's called. So I've had several clients actually that were in their mid-20s that went and were put on these medications by a doctor, and it didn't do a single thing. And so I will poke around a little bit to kind of just get some of their history and really find out what is it that's leading to this low desire. 90% of the time, it's not physiological. Most of the time, it's psychological.
Right.
And emotional.
Complacency and communication, how common are they as factors in this?
Yeah, very common. I mean, communication is huge. It's a really big and very important piece of the puzzle, particularly for women, because women, the way that our bodies are designed, we're designed to be receptive. And really what the bliss is in women's sexuality is really through the act of receptivity and surrender. and which that can actually be a very terrifying place for a woman. So her ability to be able to communicate her desires, to use her voice to speak if something's not feeling great. So what happens a lot of times is sex might even be painful for a woman, but she won't know how to actually say, hey, stop, or that doesn't feel so good. Can we try something else? And so she'll just tolerate it. What happens when she's doing that again and again and again is she's going to totally shut down. She's going to lose interest. And that's where we get this idea that like sex is just for men, or like women don't like sex as much as men. That's not actually true. So that communication piece is a really big part in really helping her to connect with her voice.
I mean, often you hear so many of these generalizations, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they're based on fact somewhere along the way, but is there that much, how true are they? I mean, like, oh, men are responsible to do this and women's responsibility is this, and when it comes to functioning in the intimacy of a relationship,
you have these ideas, are socially constructed ideas of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a man, and have roles that it should be this and should be that. And that throw those out the window. Any idea of you should
that's
be
my point.
Yeah. However, when we look at, I'm also not a proponent of neutering the entire world and saying that men and women are no different than one another, that, we're more similar than we are different. I actually don't really agree with that. I'm not really a fan of just trying to make everything neutral either, especially when it comes to sex. It doesn't necessarily mean that as, the female partner that you have to necessarily be passive or receptive or surrendered all the time. However, there is really an aspect of learning how to work with the feminine energy. If you are a woman who has a feminine essence sexuality, meaning that you prefer to be taken, like that's where your bliss comes, is that you don't want to be the initiator, right? You want your partner to initiate more often than not, and you like to be surrendered. Really learning how to access that feminine energy and that feminine element, it's really a skill and an art that can be learned. So that's really what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that you have to be that, or that you should be something that you're not. A certain percentage of women probably wouldn't identify with that. But most women, that's really, and most of the women that I counsel and coach, that's really, they are women of a feminine essence, but they are actually so terrified of the release, of the surrender, or they don't know how to get out of their heads, right? And if we're in our heads all the time, we're not actually in relaxation, which is really
in the moment, right.
Yeah, so it's really more about just learning these different qualities of energy, I guess, is a nice way to think of it as well, and then consciously playing those out in the relationship and in the sexual domain.
How beneficial is it if both parties, a male and a female heterosexual relationship, are consciously aware of both the feminine and the masculine within each other and within themselves?
I mean, I think it's extremely important. And really, how I look at it is we want to have range, right? We don't necessarily want to only be limited to being able to experience ourselves in our feminine energy. It's really awesome to be able, we have both within us, right? I have access to masculine energy as well as my feminine energy, though I tend to reside more in my feminine. To be able to have access to my masculine is really powerful. And it's great if I'm with a partner who's willing and interested in allowing that expression to come out, that they can drop into more of their receptive, into more of their feminine energy. I think that's really a beautiful dance that can happen. And it can really just be more of a flow. It's not necessarily something that we have to even think about or plan, but that we can just feel what the moment's actually asking for. I think that's really the art. It's kind of like, it's partner dance, really. I do a lot of partner dancing. I don't know if you're a fan of dance at all, but anyone who's done any kind of salsa or ballroom dancing or any kind of partner dance, it's really more about feeling and sensing one another. And even though we think that, the man leads and the woman follows, when you get at a really high level of dance, it actually can, but those lines can blur, and the follow can actually sometimes take over the lead. So, and that's a higher level. And I really think that in sex and sexuality, that's really the place that we want to get to, where we're just in the moment, really feeling what the moment's asking for and listening to that and responding to that. And whether that's masculine energy or feminine or something in between, that's not so important. What we call it isn't really so important. It's more about listening to what the moment's asking for and being responsive and expressive to that.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that too, because I don't think I've heard the same definition to what, or a perception of what, feminine energy and masculine energy is from any two people. Like everybody has their own interpretation and their, whatever works for each person. What is yours? How do you describe what feminine energy is in general, and to yourself? And the same thing, the masculine, the balance of the two.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's hard to put it into words because it's really an experience. That's really the only way to really understand the difference between masculine and feminine. But the best way that I've found to teach this and to experience it for myself is really through understanding it has to do with where you're putting your awareness. So the masculine by nature, and if we use the partner dance as an example, if you've ever done partner dancing and you're in the lead role, you're always at least a couple, if not 3 or 4 steps ahead in your mind, figuring out what's coming next. You are providing and protecting your partner. You want to make sure that she's not bumping into the wall or that you're not going to run her into another person on the dance floor. So you have to be several steps ahead, guiding and directing. You're leading the dance. So that is really the essence of what it means to be in the masculine. It's about planning, it's about guiding, it's about protection, giving direction, being a couple steps ahead into the future because you're planning. Versus when you're in the lead or the follow role in a partner dance, this is really descriptive of what feminine energy truly, truly is. Your awareness is in a completely different place. You're not up here looking ahead several steps and looking around to make sure that, your partner's protected. You're deeply, if you're a good follow, you're actually deeply connected to the sensation in your body. You're feeling, if you're good, you're feeling your partner. And you can almost feel into what's coming next if you're that good and that tuned in.
When you're in that zone or in sync.
Well, if you're a follow and you're just playing your follow role, you don't even have to worry about being in sync except just feeling the moment and feeling what it's asking for and surrendering into that guidance. So it's really about where you're holding your awareness. The feminine is going to be it has diffuse awareness. When I'm in the follow role as a dancer, or even as having sex, if I'm in my feminine element, my awareness is diffuse. I'm almost sensing everything around me because I don't know what's coming next, right? So I'm listening almost with my body for that guidance, for that direction. So masculine and feminine is where are you holding your awareness at any given time? And we need to have both, right? It would be pretty hard to drive a car and make it to the grocery store if we were just like feeling everything around us. We have to have, okay, I'm get in the car, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to go shopping. Now, if we get to the grocery store and let's say we don't have anything specific we need to buy, we just are there, we want to kind of see, we're at the market, we want to see what's available. Maybe we're just sensing and feeling like, ooh, let's look at this over here. Wow, that feels really good. Versus if we have a list and an agenda and we got to get the carrots and the onions and the tomato and get back home, it's a different energy that we're taking into that experience, right? So you can see that we actually have access to both, and everybody does. Like the masculine gets shit done, but it's the feminine that is really the force that in many ways you need the cooperation of the feminine really to be directed. If you think about that, it really guides.
I don't think it's not that deep to think about. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. I think that it's just the words that carry the stigma. Like when a woman even thinks that she, is associated with masculinity, there's some kind of offense to be taken. When a man hears femininity attached to them in any way, it's, the wall goes up and all shit comes out of nowhere, right? Instead of just, we all have it with both. Every human being. This is my perception. And I want to ask you if you think there's, what you think of how I say it in this moment, right?
Yeah.
I've heard it put as the masculine comes from the head and the feminine comes from the heart. You were talking about it in your description. I was thinking of like team sports. When you were doing that dance and who's leading and following, right? Following, but, it's almost like complimenting. Like in a team sport, somebody has to be the leader. There's a quarterback. There's, somebody has to be in charge. And people have to understand their roles.
Right.
And when you understand your role, you're like a link in the chain. And when all the links are connected, things move smoothly forward, right?
Absolutely. Because try to have a partner dance with 2 people trying to lead. It's not a fun experience.
Right. But the more work that you put in together, like you spend time, you get to know instinctively what that person's going to do before they do it. whether you're leading or following. Like
Well,
that camaraderie, that chemistry, develops the more time you do it together, right?
definitely when you practice with the same partner again and
With the
again.
same intention.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's in a way where things can become boring though as well. If you have a partner, that's always doing the same five moves and it gets predictable. I mean, that's how people get really bored in sex. That's how I get bored on the dance floor. If I have a partner that I'm like, oh, it's this guy again, the same five
Yeah.
moves. All
Yeah,
for,
no, no, yeah, that's a valid point. What I'm kind of trying to get at is that I don't mean it in a boring way. I think that happens because when people put their mind on the same intention, there's a certain amount of built-in communication. It's mandatory. You can't function as a unit without people being, on the same page. What happens in relationships is we assume. I assume you know where I'm at. I assume you know what, and the communication just it's not crystal clear. And then things, messages get misinterpreted and
right.
and then things just go awry. It's so easy because you're talking about the most intimate portion of people's lives, and then the fears and the insecurities and all these things come into play.
Yeah.
But the only answer to all of it, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, is communication.
Yeah, and I think you have to define what do you mean by communication, because that's a very broad term. Like, what do we actually mean? What do you mean when you say communication? That might
Well,
be.
I mean, trust. Being able to make a person feel comfortable enough to be completely vulnerable. Like if something scares them or something, if you're saying that someone is afraid to use their voice, express themselves, say something, this, I'm not cool with this, well, that's already indicating to me that something's not right here. That you can't say that.
Right.
You know.
Well, it might be that it's not, yeah, there could be some other stuff going on in the relationship that it's not safe to speak out. But most of the time, what I see, at least in my work, is more that, there's been maybe a woman that's come from a family where it wasn't, she had her own feelings or needs or desires. They were maybe totally invalidated, or she was told, don't feel that, or suck it up and deal with it. So she's learned to shut her voice down.
Right.
Right. So it's this pattern of self-sacrifice and self-editing, so that she's, overthinking everything instead of really connecting her voice with her heart, with her genitals, of like, wow, right now, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I need. Just those two things can change your life.
Being it's also done in the guise of where you can actually think you're doing something good for the unit. Like, I'm taking one for the team here. I'm going to keep my mouth shut and I'm going to go and march onward. And,
Right.
It's not that way. It doesn't, play out that way.
Right. I mean, yeah, because any time that we're just tolerating something, it's actually reinforcing this negative pattern you're giving. I'm taking one for the team. I mean, if you're in any kind of situation where you're not willing.
That's a very feminine term, by the way, right?
What is a feminine term?
Taking one for the team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the whole model of self-sacrifice, right? And
Well,
yeah.
you know what, Morgan, honestly, that's why I wanted to speak with you on this. And that's why, this topic comes up all the time. But I really think that we're just so conditioned. And, in people's lives, we have such a limited amount of time on this planet, right? So you have, a partner. It, at least at one point, it was, this is the most important person in my life, right? But we don't really give it that kind of reverence because we get complacent. We take things for granted. All these things come into play.
Right.
And then there you are in this situation, and then years go by, and you're like, I don't know you, and I don't know you, and it's just all these dynamics. This is common. This is like almost everywhere, right?
Very
So
true.
somebody like you is vital to society. If you can take two people, a couple, say, right, and you can explain to them the importance, how this is so fixable.
Yeah.
It's so fixable but you have to pay attention, and you have to take direction, and you have to trust. And do the things that you're going to tell them they're going to, try to do.
Well, yeah, and you have to stop the blame game. Like each person in a relationship is 100% responsible for that relationship. There's this idea it's 50-50. It's not. It's 100 and it's 100. So me in a relationship, I am 100% responsible for
Usually
me.
more than that. Usually 100 ain't going to cut it.
In how am I showing up right now? And if I'm not using my voice, what tends to happen how resentment gets there is because, something happens, I don't speak up for it, and then I get pissed at my partner that I'm
Right.
angry about it.
Resentment is built.
Yeah, instead of just saying, wow, that really sucked, that really hurts.
Yeah.
So, that's resentment is all about being a victim and blaming the other person. The only way out of that is to take responsibility for your experience and make a
Yeah.
choice. And I don't care if it's hard. I mean, that's the thing. Is, oh, I'm afraid, or it's really hard to. I know it's hard. It's really hard for me for many, many years till I fucking figured it out. Um, and now I have a strong commitment to that. That if I have to advocate for myself, I have to speak up for myself. And if I get good at that and I'm still not being met, or my partner's not willing to show up and to meet me in that, then I have a choice. Then I can stay and continue that pattern, or I can leave. I
And
can
that
leave.
choice is going to be a lot easier to make when you're speaking up for yourself.
Well, I'm absolutely. I mean, that's how we get in these patterns where the distance, you feel like you're in a relationship, but you feel really lonely, or you've been married for 20 years, but you feel like you don't know your partner anymore. That's how we get there. And how we get out of that is through self-knowledge and through doing the inner work, what I call like the deeper work of sex and intimacy, which is this deep personal development work.
Yeah.
It's not all about like, oh, here's how to have 50 orgasms in 30 minutes. That's great, but that's not going to necessarily make your relationship better. So I can have 50 orgasms in 5 seconds. Great. How does that actually improve my relationship? It doesn't.
Well, I think you probably just passed the speed of sound if you could actually do that. 50
Right.
orgasms in 5 seconds, it would be.
Or 5 minutes, whatever. I mean,
I'm just.
well, this is what a lot of the sex gurus or, the
Yeah,
stuff
no. I'm just being
teaching
facetious.
out there,
I'm not
which,
trying to minimize your point. Your point's absolutely valid.
yeah.
I can say how many women I've spoke to who are single. Like, I'm 59 years old. I talk to, people I know my whole life. And when you're talking about, like, particular sexual practices, right? And I've had girls tell me, like, you just, you don't work on something with somebody. They're supposed to know. You're going to meet a complete stranger, and they're supposed to know you. And they're supposed to, I'm like, it's fucking bizarre.
Yeah.
I get it though, because until you cross that line and start to kind of open yourself and avail yourself to things, you only know what you know. So I get it, but like there has to become a certain point when you say this way of thinking and based on our conditioning isn't fucking working. Not only has it never worked, it's not gonna ever work.
No, it's never, because how can you expect someone else to know more about your body than you know? And good luck if you're out there just thinking that, Mr. Magic Finger is going to show up on his right horse and just know how to rock your world sexually. I mean, good luck on that. That didn't work well for me. It didn't. And
I think maybe the 3 or 4 people in the history of life that it's worked out for, I don't know where they are right now, but I don't think you get to vouch for that concept. But yet we've all been kind of under this impression, there's great chemistry, but I mean, there's a lot of practical ways to work through these things, is my point.
Yeah.
And you have these answers.
Yeah, I think in long term, you have a one night stand that was great, sure, but you go try to have a long term relationship with that. I guarantee you're going to run into some problems probably at some point or another. So I think that those moments maybe they do happen, and we have these romantic ideas and fantasies that we just want the sex part to be easy. Like, it's okay to work on everything else in our life, but when we get to the bedroom, we should just know what we're doing, and it's not true. That's actually, of all places, where we're the most lost.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm so glad you said it, because this is the first interview when this is the subject matter that I didn't have to say that. Because I really think I've been through so much therapy, but because my issue has always been drugs and alcohol, right, addiction issue, that I'm always going in and out of therapy over a relapse, or there's always this big elephant in the room. So that's always the overriding issue, and there's so much stuff we never get to before the next relapse, and then we go back to square one again, and it's just this constant revolving door of not growing. So I'm dealing with issues now that I've just never been sober this long. So they come up when they come up, But with that all being said, this is the area that we choose more often than not, I think, to just kind of leave alone and not give it the priority as part of our wholeness that it warrants.
I totally agree. I mean, so much of that is our social conditioning. Most of us grew up in families where sex wasn't talked about and no one taught us about. We learned, maybe if we're lucky, we learned a little bit in school about reproductive
Catholic
stuff.
school, so there'd be none of that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
You can say it because whatever it is, I'll agree with it. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
those Catholic girls were always the first ones to get pregnant at the Catholic school. I'm not kidding. Those are always the girls got pregnant in high school because they didn't have the education, of course,
Right.
right? But nobody, maybe, like I said, maybe you get a little bit in school, but it's all about functionality and physiology. No one teaches us about actual pleasure or consent or how to make a sexual relationship pleasurable for both people. Like, no one's teaching us that. And so we're conditioned to think that it's just supposed to work. It's just a natural part of life, and we're just supposed to know how it works. And there's so much shame around it when it's not working. It's really hard for couples to reach out for help or to even know where to go to find help, or that help, like what I do, even exists.
When you reach your adult years and you say to somebody, "My sex life is not measuring up," people look at you like, "Wow, that's so wow, that's so bad." Like, how did it get to the this nobody does anything like with like holistic approach to healing. It's like, let's take care of yourself before you get sick. Again, it's so fixable. That's why I can't believe
Yeah.
that I personally think it is religion that gets in the way here, whatever the religion is,
Sure.
because they put such a stigma around it instead of just like allowing people to understand, as an individual, really who you are in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and
How can you, yeah, I'm sorry.
I mean, it's shocking to me too that the mainstream religions, they have absolutely extricated sex from the entire picture, and it's a sin and this and that. But like every single fucking one of us got here through sex. We all came out of a vagina, and I'm pretty sure somewhere a penis was involved somehow in some way, right? We all came from sex, so it's shocking to me that these mainstream religions that they just completely try to shut that part out. And it really causes for dysfunction, which obviously, we've seen that with the fall of the Catholic Church and all the molestation stuff that's come out of there. When you deny the sexuality, it comes out distorted and in really unhealthy and destructive ways. That's the only thing that's ever going to come of that if we continue to repress our sexuality.
Do you think that's a patriarchal thing, that something that men have kind of established to keep women in the dark and as, second class as far as their voice in this subject matter, not giving you the platform, by degrading you, by, it's been going on for centuries, right? And
Yeah.
there's really not that much change as we speak. There's
Right.
some,
Well,
and thank God for some, but
yeah.
when you really think about it, it's still the overwhelming,
Yeah. Well, and I think
perspective is that these guys are going to call the shots and tell everybody how they're supposed to fall in line.
absolutely. I mean, I think some of it is starting to crumble. Thank God for that. But yeah, no, absolutely right. Because the sexuality and sexual energy and the expression of that through the feminine form. I mean, our bodies hold and nurture life. We give birth. It's the mystery even of the menstrual cycle. The
The
sexual
mystery
energy.
of the menstrual cycle.
That can be our next
Oh
next
my
show.
God, that's like a mini series right there.
We can talk about that today if you want. But yeah, I mean, that it's all entirely about control and not necessarily even only controlling women, though, yes, I mean, that is very much where it started with, so that, keeping the power and the authority so that men could keep that power and authority. They did have to
Yeah,
distort.
that's what it all comes down to.
And the whole story of Mary Magdalene being a prostitute, that actually is not, there's no factual basis for and really,
Factual basis for, I've had many people tell me it's an out and out fabrication. It's a complete,
it is.
it's a complete reversal of what the facts of the matter are. And I don't really know enough to say one way or the other, but I do know that there's more than one view on that whole relationship dynamic, whatever.
Yes, they had to. It was sort of built in by the early church fathers as a way to, yeah, sort of remove womanhood from the story of Christianity, Really. I mean, and this is, we're talking mainstream. If you look into the mystical traditions of Christianity, some of the Gnostic traditions, the Sophian Gnostics specifically, understand Mary Magdalene as the first apostle of Christ. She was the first to see the risen Savior. She was the first one commanded to go spread the good news. And yet she gets edited out, and we get Peter and the other guy, I don't remember who it was, these are the ones now, the men, right? And so she was really edited out in the mainstream when the literature, the religious literature became codified through the councils of Nicaea way back in 300 something BC or AD. That's where they really started to decide what is Christianity going to be. And that's really where it got ingrained. These stories that we hear today, which aren't really the full picture. It's completely missing the feminine element. The feminine element's been completely edited
it's
out.
not missing it. I think it's deliberately sidetracking everybody from it. Like everybody's like, look over here, because the most important thing is that you don't look over here.
Right. Let's make her a prostitute, which is shameful, and let's look over here instead, because when we shut down the sexual energy, we are far more easily controlled. Wilhelm Reich, who was a scientist and researcher, I don't know if you and I talked about this previously, he writes about this. The best way to control a population is through the control of the sexual energy. And the way that's done is through shaming
Just turn
children.
on the TV.
Yeah. And it makes people then become like, what is it? Then they look outside themselves for authority rather than listening to their own authority. So if you want to brainwash a population, control the sexuality.
It's really interesting, and then we'll get off this because I don't want to get too far off where we were going. But it's really interesting to me how everybody can look at religion, especially if you want to look at like Catholic or Christian religion, right? And you can see all these, signals that signify so much to everybody. And what's lost, which I don't ever hear anything about, is how about the fact that even Jesus, who this whole thing is all about, right? Mm-hmm. He rebelled and he walked his own walk against whatever he was conditioned to be taught was right in spirituality as being a Jew. He says, he went his own, there was no Christianity because that was based on him, right? So where was he going? He wasn't really going to any particular place. He was walking his walk. Mm-hmm. And why is everybody missing in that? Like, isn't that the thing that we should take away from it? Walk your own fucking walk. Don't have to be a sheep your whole life. If you were a sheep because you were brought in and taught to be sheep, that's great. Yeah. But there comes a time, it's like, crossing that line from being a boy to a man, a girl to a woman, where you just got to start making your own decisions and say, I don't have to just, they can't tell me what integrity is. They're not going to be my moral compass, right? Especially when there's so much information out there. Like, but ultimately, I think most people would just rather be led than to lead.
Yeah, but right. Sovereignty really is really what you're touching on here is really there comes with a lot of responsibility with that. And most people are so afraid of their own power and their own authority, you're right, that they would rather abdicate that to something outside themselves so that they don't have to be responsible.
And then as soon as somebody does walk their own walk, they're a threat to everybody else.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not this Bible thumper or anything, but if you just base it on, you don't have to know that much about it, but there was a lot of conflict in the Bible, a lot of conflict. It is what it is. It's not supposed to be an easy ride. Mm-hmm. Right? So, but now you want to take away people's sexuality. You want to compromise so many areas of their life and give them this moral code to live by. I guess we all need like a benchmark to go by to kind of, I think that could probably help us all, but that doesn't mean we all have to stay. It's black and white. If you make that one mistake, it's just I think it's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, I do think that often that this topic is not given the attention that it needs. I heard the numbers are going to be off here. I don't remember exactly what it was, but somebody had said that in a healthy relationship, that a healthy sex life between the partners would be 5-10% of the relationship, whereas in an unhealthy relationship, a bad sex life, or a no sex life, whatever, would be 95% of it, because when that part of your life is not in line, it affects every other area of your life.
Yeah, I'm not following like how you can think of a percentage of a
I'm
relationship.
just, again, then they did have numbers. I don't remember what they were. But
Okay.
in other words, in what I'm trying to say is, if when you're in have a healthy sex life in a relationship, it's not that it's important, but when it's healthy,
Hmm.
it's not ripping away at these other areas of your life. It's
Oh,
enhancing
boy.
your relationship. It's intact, but then you're able to do so much else that
Definitely.
it's important.
Yeah.
It might be the most important area, but it's still, all these other things can be built around it because
Yeah.
that's there. Whereas if not, everything else gets destroyed because you got all this bitterness, this angst, this
Right.
all this shit that comes with.
Totally. Which is really an example of the sexual energy not really being satisfied, I guess, like when there's a lot of bickering and arguing and all these other things. I mean, a lot of that's actually an example of the sexual energy not flowing through each
Yeah,
individual and flowing through the relationship. And the sex is what makes an intimate relationship an intimate relationship. Otherwise, we don't marry our friends usually. Right? I mean, it's the sex is the thing that sets an intimate relationship apart from all of our other relationships. So, in my opinion, it is extremely important and really should be probably one of the most important things in the relationship.
when you meet new clients, do you ever feel like almost like they feel you're a threat, like as you know too much, like like you already know whatever when they're, it's not a good place to be if it's your first time to see somebody like you. Like
Oh,
obviously, there's something not right in your relationship, right? And
hmm.
now you got to expose yourself to somebody else, so that that's an awkward place to be.
Yeah, but I think most of the time, by the time people make it to me, they're really grateful for that knowledge. And I don't ever purport to know everything. I don't call myself an expert for a reason because I don't ever want to be a know-it-all. I'm
Yeah.
always learning. I'm always growing. And yeah, I know a lot of shit. So I think for the most part, people are relieved by the time they make it into my office. I have had some situations where one partner in the relationship, yeah, felt a little threatened by me, I think, or wanted to challenge everything that I said because she had just ordered this book off Amazon that was telling her something. I'm like, go read your fucking book then. Don't waste your time and your money coming to see me. Like if the book's enough for you, just go read the
Right,
book.
but don't you
Really,
understand
I
that
mean,
that's their insecurity, and it's so awkward? That's what I mean. It's not like it's not you personally. It's just
right.
because you're in that role and you threaten their, what they believe, about themselves.
Yeah, though largely most people are pretty relieved by the time they make it into my office. But yeah, I think definitely in general, especially, one of my main advocacy projects right now is around male infant circumcision, which is a routine
Oh, you got me
practice.
early. I was saving up for that one.
Well, because this is where it highlights this idea of feeling threatened.
That was like
You-
we just took
Like,
a U-turn. Do you realize what we just did?
well, we can edit it, or you can cut and paste it, or I can stop. You want me to stop and we can come back to it? We
It's
can come back
fine.
to
It's
it.
fine. This is a really interesting topic, and I really wanted to go here anyway.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, sure. So, we get these ideas around how the way things are supposed to be. And that topic, male infant circumcision, is a really, really controversial topic because people have these ingrained beliefs about it that aren't really underpinned by any scientific fact or data if you really start to dig into the issue. Yet they're extremely threatened with this idea of maybe, like, what if this is a practice that we should abandon? And what if I circumcise my son and now I have to face the inconvenient truth that that might have not really been the best choice to have made as a parent. So there's all kinds of stuff tied up in that. And yes, when our personal beliefs are threatened, we have to stop and really look at what's true and what the facts are.
You're the first person I've ever spoke to that's ever brought this subject up, in conversation. And I understand it, and I honor the fact that you're really passionate about this. But where does that come from?
Where does my passion for it come
For
from?
this, yeah, for this
Gosh.
particular topic, yeah.
That's a good question.
Well, it's been gnawing at me for like the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, since we talked last, like, why is she so passionate about this? There's a few reasons for my passion. Number one, I think that this is a cause that in my lifetime if I advocate for this and enough other people do, I honestly think that we could see a change. I really think that it's one of those things where there genuinely this practice might be abandoned in my lifetime. So I think that there's something in that if I work hard
Makes
at this,
you feel like you can be a difference maker here.
exactly,
That's
like
cool.
there's
Yeah,
real possibility.
yeah. Good for you.
So there's that. The other piece as an advocate for pleasure for both men and women, but as a female, it changes the dynamic of sex. Having, circumcision, it does, because
most men being circumcised, like, I mean, don't know anything else. I mean, by the time I even know you were, it's,
I know.
I mean, you don't know anything else. So, I mean, like, doesn't it get lost that this topic is, I know how important it is to you, but how do you get people to get on that train?
Well, I think it really, you're right. And that is, I do run into that a lot. Like, I turned out fine. I have met men who have not turned out fine, who have a numbness in their penis that they attribute because how else a severed nerve? How do you get that except through circumcision and accident? Or numbness upon erection, and then the total inability to as adults, and they can't figure out why is this happening to my penis. What we know, and this is just factual scientific evidence, is that the babies, when they get circumcised, they go into a trauma response. So their very first sexual experience, there's touching to the penis. They've got to, prepare it for the cutting. Many babies get erections actually from that. And then the first thing that's happening is the piercing pain of the removal of the foreskin. That can get embedded. Now, not in everybody, and it's great. I'm so glad that many men don't have problems from this. But I think as you start to educate yourself about it, why it's so hard for us to do this, and for many men to want to do this as well, because you start to realize, like, well, holy fuck, like maybe I lost more than I realized.
But it's almost pointless because it's not coming back.
Well, it's not pointless because we still have future generations of baby boys being born in this country that are still being
level, yeah, okay,
because they want to look like dad, which is probably the most ridiculous reason to cut a baby boy's foreskin off, just for aesthetic reasons.
Do people tell you this? I mean, you've heard people say, I want him to look like me?
Oh, yes. And this is one of the reasons that many fathers will, even women who are like, I don't want to circumcise my son, but their partners will push for it.
Not having a kid. I mean, I don't have kids, so I didn't come across these type of issues. So
yeah, no, that's a big reason why families choose to still circumcise. It's one of them.
Okay, but in defense of those people, if a guy hasn't had any areas or issues in that area, I mean, then why wouldn't you just repeat when you have a kid, do the same thing?
Why? Because you have to stop and ask yourself, why would you? Why do you want to cause that?
When you mention trauma, right? I mean, I've had these conversations with people that have had real traumas, and I'm not saying that this isn't, but I'm just going to say that when you go through your childhood, you learn from other children, and as you gain information as we grow, that what happened was not appropriate or was just vile or whatever it is, and then you start to intellectually realize that you were traumatized. If you don't know that is bad or wrong, or I mean, the pain is over. Like the child is so young.
It's not over. I mean, that's the thing, is for some men, you're right. They're fine, but there are some men that go through life and there's something there, and they don't know what it is, and they don't know how to talk about it. And having the education of like being able to understand that, oh my God, maybe this is what it's related to. It's so
how many people? I mean, what do you think the percentage is of people that are actually dealing with this?
I think it's a lot higher than we realize, because men, number one, aren't super fond of talking
It's not
about their penises unless it's positive, right? So this is a really hard thing. We want to acknowledge that penile reduction, it's a penile reduction surgery, apparently is another name for circumcision. It reduces the size of the penis. Why would anybody want to do that to their penis unless there's a medical necessity for it, in the very rare cases where that's the case?
But I'm sure, isn't that part of the whole reason it in the first place was for hygiene purposes, right?
Well, originally, actually, in different cultures around the globe, there's different reasons for it. Some of them are religious, and other ones actually are for the censorship of male pleasure. And where it comes from largely in the Western world, why it's done on families that are not, it's a Jewish tradition. If you're an Orthodox Jew, the circumcision is a really important part of that tradition. But many, many, many people, many Christians think it's part of their religion, and it's not. Really, where it comes from, back in the Victorian times, circumcision was thought to be a cure for masturbation because pleasure was such a sin and masturbation was considered a sin.
And this is fact.
Yeah, this is factual. This is like in history books or.
I'll take your word. I know you've done your homework on this. This is a very, big issue for you. I get it.
I mean, it is. And yeah, and on the topic of pleasure, I mean, you are affecting a man's sexual pleasure when you remove the foreskin. Now, if you don't have a foreskin, you're not going to really understand the difference because you can go back actually. That's a topic in a minute, but the way the penis was designed, the foreskin glides over the glands of the penis, and it actually creates stimulation for the head of the penis, which is the most sensitive area. When you remove the foreskin, you have
You're
to
like
find
a guy's dream. That you can have so much great understanding of the penis. This is unbelievable.
Well, so you take the foreskin off, and how does he have to now get that rubbing and that friction that he otherwise would have got from his very own penis? He has to now get it through either more stimulation and using the vagina in a different way to get more stimulation on the penis so that he can get that pleasure. Versus when you have the foreskin on there, first of all, it has thousands of nerve endings in it, kind of like the clitoris. So it has the ability to sense very fine levels of sensation, right? Like the fingers, our hands, Meissner's corpuscles is the name of the nerve endings, and our hands have thousands of it as well for that fine sensation. When a man has his foreskin, so he can feel finer sensations and have that pleasure just from the motion of the penis in the vagina. You don't have to push and rub and grind so hard in the vagina to get the same amount of pleasure. And I'll tell you, so in 43 years of my life and being unmarried, I've had the opportunity to meet a few penises in my life.
Good for you.
My fair share.
Bravo.
Thank you. And I've been, let me say, it's very rare to find an intact penis in the wild, but I have bเป็นblessed to have had that experience.
Intact penis in the wild. Wow.
I've been blessed to have that experience as a woman, and I'll tell you, it's just a totally different experience. And this is not to make any penis wrong. I honor and worship all men and their penises as beautiful and holy and sacred and amazing, but it's a totally different experience. It is just a different experience. And why do we want to take that away from men and women? And on the note of female pleasure and female sexuality, one of the reasons women shut down to sex is because that friction is too much for us a lot of times. The slower motions of the penis and sort of the more gentle pulsing can open us more. We can work into it more easily instead of that need to get in there and thrust and get the sensation. It actually shuts the vagina down is what that does. And that's how women lose interest in sex over time. So that's why I'm so passionate about this topic of let's get rid of this practice of male infant circumcision. It's not necessary. If it's needed, if there's a medical reason, that will reveal itself. It's very rare. But you can choose at that time if it's medically necessary when the boy is older and actually having a problem, then we can talk about circumcision. But just to do it routinely makes no sense.
So what is your end game here with this? I mean, do you just want to give each, parent in that moment of right after childbirth that you give them the choice instead of just, succumbing to, whatever protocol that they know? You want to say, listen, there's more to it. Just make a conscious decision, whatever it would be. Because you can't tell people you have to do this or that.
I want to change the thinking around this on a cultural, I wish a global scale, but let's just work on America because it's highly prevalent in America, more even than some other parts of the world.
Actually, you probably want to go door to door, work at one house at a time.
I think we just need a movement. We need more education. I'm actually hosting a screening of the documentary film called American Circumcision, which does an absolutely incredible job actually showing both sides of the conversation in just a really they're not trying to prove anything or make you believe anything. It's just, here's why people believe it should be. Here's some facts around why these people think that it shouldn't. It's fascinating. So, it's really through education. I think we have to change the way we think about this. I mean, think about this, tonsillectomy, removing a child's tonsils, that used to be a routine procedure that was just done without question up until about the 1970s. And then they realized like, hey, this isn't really having the benefits that we thought it was going to have. Like, it's not this cure-all, right? So maybe we should question why we're continuing to do this just sort of across the board and routinely as this prophylactic. Right? It was supposed to prevent all kinds of respiratory illnesses, which didn't really turn out to be that. So we had to rethink how we thought about that. And in the medical advice was all about this is a good thing, but the thoughts about it changed. The facts didn't support, the evidence wasn't really supporting why we were doing it. And so we stopped doing that. And I really believe that male infant circumcision is really the same type of issue, that we have to pause here. It doesn't matter what we hope that it's going to achieve. It doesn't matter what we believe it's going to do. It doesn't actually do that. If you look at the facts, you look at the scientific evidence, none of that's supporting our reasons for staying with the practice. Why I think it's so hard for us why it's so controversial is because I think we don't want to face the shame of what we've done to our men and boys. And I think a lot of men would rather not have to confront the fact that maybe you did lose something more than you realize, even though maybe you don't have problems or maybe
you know what? That's a valid point, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's that complex. I think like as guys, we don't have to be all that intellectual on something like this. We don't know what we don't know. Like I don't know what I don't, these experiences you're talking about, right? I don't know what they are because I've never had them. So it's kind of a non-issue.
But if you talk to men that have had them, and if you watch this film, the American Circumcision, you start to learn, wow. You know what,
Morgan, I think that's the whole point of what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
I think this communication, having this conversation, I'm learning. There's so much about women that I didn't know until you actually talk to women about it.
Right.
And have conversation and hear from them themselves that can give me a better understanding, or any guy has this conversation a better understanding, and vice versa. I mean, but you have to have the conversations. These things are not supposed to. It's all the stigma and all the conditioning that we've all been subjected to in one way or another, right?
That's what I mean. We have to have the conversation, and so around the circumcision debate, we have to get out there at least educate yourself about the other side of the picture.
What's the reaction when you? I mean, you're putting this out there, right?
Yes, I am.
What reaction are you getting?
Oh, wow. I mean, I get everything from the moms who really support banning circumcision, who didn't circumcise their sons and who really get it, all the way up to the parents who did choose to circumcise, all the way up to the religious. A good friend of mine is Jewish, all the way up to her great offense at my suggesting that this practice should be banned because it's part of their religious law. It highly felt like I was judging her and, just all this, how sacred this practice is for her community, her religious community. And, the whole range up to the misbeliefs that it's cleaner. And
do you feel that you're getting a lot more resistance with your message than understanding?
I think I'm getting a fair dose of both, but I really, the stance that I really want to take is that I'm not here to make anybody wrong for the choice that they made, because that's the past. And I believe that every parent tries to do the best. They make the best choice they can based on the information they were given at that time. So if you circumcise your son, I'm not here to tell you you were wrong for doing that. You shouldn't have done that. Okay, because what's done is done. My stance and my message is that we have to start where we're at. And we have to look towards the future that we want to create. You got
to show me concrete evidence.
There is concrete.
If you show me concrete evidence, I can't debate that.
Well, you would think. I mean, you would think that you can't debate that.
Well,
yeah.
What else can you do? I mean, in your position,
all the time.
If you can spell it out for me, you've done your job. No.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but even in the scientific community, what we see around this,
you're going to get backlash from that too, right?
Well, even the scientific community is refuting their own evidence because we don't want to admit that we're wrong, or science has become a religion and this is what we believe is true. So even though the evidence is to the contrary, we're going to still say that it's true. And this is a fact. There's a great book written by Greg Braden about this called Deep Truth, where he goes into this topic in great detail, how scientific experiments, the evidence is to the contrary, but the scientists are so committed to wanting the outcome to be this certain thing that they refute the evidence that actually is rejecting their.
But in any big thing, I mean, with football, right? There's head injuries. This is not debatable, but there's resistance. There's
Yes.
actually people saying that all of this science, when they show you how a concussion, just from the shaking inside the skull of the brain, how
Yeah.
much damage that does, and there's so many cases on record, you're still going to come up against so much resistance because the powers to be are going to be
Yeah.
threatened. They don't need the sport of football's billions and billions of dollars. And there's
Right.
a lot of people that get, uptight about anybody coming in there trying to point things out. But nevertheless, the information's out there. So now there's a lot of parents that are making actual. There's many retired football players who their whole life is because of football that will
Yeah.
not let their own kids play football.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't if
So,
I
so
had
I
a
would
son.
think that's a win for anybody who put that information out. So
Right.
that's why ultimately I'm saying is if you get the truth, what how you see it, and you
Hmm.
can show those facts to everybody, I still have to make my decision. But
Yeah.
I know if you give me, the information, you've done your job.
Right, right. And that is my job, is just to put the information out there and to help to educate, not to shame, not even to try to persuade or convince. Just look at the facts and then figure out where you stand. And I agree. If you actually look at the facts around circumcision, to me, it would be all, like, how could you still stand on the side of being a proponent for it? Like, to me, the answer is obvious, but it's not to everybody and for
You,
everybody.
you know what I'm thinking about when you're saying this? I'm just thinking like, well, if you don't do it, then you always have the chance to do it as life goes on,
Sure.
right? So that's one way. That's a no-brainer. Then don't do it. Then if a situation arises and you need to do it, it's there to do. Where you
Yeah.
didn't ruin anything first, right? Okay, that's one theory, right? Now you got to factor in the pain involved, and you're not going to get anybody to sign up for that unless they're just too young to know words yet.
Well, as an adult, at least they would anesthetize you. For most of the infant ones, they don't use anesthesia. So, I mean, that's where you get the
But
trauma.
well, that's what I mean. That's why you can do it because the kid doesn't even have a voice. Zero.
Right.
It doesn't know a word yet. So
Yeah. In the movie American Circumcision, they actually interview a man who chose to get circumcised as an adult. He lived 21 years of his life with a foreskin, and then I guess for whatever reason just thought that he should go do it because everybody else was circumcised. I mean, there's a lot of stigma around intact penises. Like the lover that I had, the single lone intact penis that I met out there in the wild.
I,
You know,
I, I don't even want to ask you what that nickname is for that guy. I'm sure you have.
oh, he's great. No, we're still friends. I mean, he was embarrassed. And he said, like, when I realized that he was intact and uncircumcised, I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is amazing. Like, this is like a dream come. I was like thrilled. And he was like, oh my gosh, like, no one's ever had that reaction. I usually try to hide it. He had always spent his life trying to hide his foreskin, like, because you can pull it up over the head of the penis and it kind of just looks like skin, like. He said that he had always felt embarrassed about it because other young boys were circumcised and he wasn't. And he had all this shame around it, so
Well,
this
I
is,
mean that's another thing though too. You gotta. I mean that's a dynamic that you can't look past either because kids are kids, and boys in the locker room.
well, this is messed up.
There's
I mean,
heavy
Mother
stuff going
Nature
there, man.
this is the way Mother Nature made a penis. So really the other way is not natural. Yet that's become the norm.
Yeah, but if you're going like you have gym class and you got to undress in the locker room and everybody is making fun of you, you've just changed in that
Well,
moment. You've been
so
that's trauma.
I think, yeah, it is. And I think that might have been why this man who was interviewed in the film, maybe why he chose to get circumcised, maybe, right? I don't really remember exactly why, but I mean, it was absolutely horrifying for him because he was like, like he didn't have the same sensation that he'd had, but he totally regretted having done it. Yeah, I mean, it's really a sad, sad story. Because
And
once
there's really no cases of the other end of that tangent. That's the
well,
whole thing.
no, actually there are. So there's a
What?
whole movement. Yeah, there's a whole movement. This is also in the film American Circumcision. Men who are foreskin restoration. There's a whole group of men that are restoring their foreskin, and how you do it is by.
Foreskin for men, is that like hair club for men? But
It's called, what's the name of their group? It's got a name. I can't remember. Is it Tug or something? But and it takes quite a long time. But they have a whole procedure for actually stretching
how
the
do you
skin.
become the spokesman for that movement?
Yeah, I know, right? But no, it's fascinating because what happens is, I mean, you have to understand that the foreskin, when it's removed, the tissue that it was protecting used to be mucosal tissue. So when you remove it, that tissue becomes hardened and it's like not calcified, but there's a word for it. Maybe it is calcified. It becomes toughened. So the head of the penis is actually toughened, whereas really it's supposed to be mucus membrane. But so what happens when you restore the foreskin through this stretching technique, they're stretching the skin of the penis over many, many months and even years, you actually can get a partial foreskin to come back and cover the head of the penis, and it turns back into mucous membrane. And then you have that gliding motion that happens over the head of the penis that gives it that pleasure. And then the mucosa membrane, the mucosal tissue is restored. And so that obviously it's like a vagina, which the mucous membrane of the vaginal entrance is very soft and moist and has a lot of feeling and sensation. You're actually bringing some of the capacity back that was lost. Now, you'll never get it 100%, but I just think that it's really incredible that there are men out there that are doing this and doing it successfully, and how much they're like, wow, like it was totally worth it. It really changes a lot of things to have a foreskin. So, we do know what it's like to not have it and then to have it.
Okay, now, so you take this so serious, and good for you for that, right? But how do you kind of gauge, like, let's just project. Let's go like 20 years from now, right? How, what would you use to gauge to say that your time was well spent? Do you have some kind of goal that you can say, well, I want to at least have accomplished this?
You mean like with what? With this movement or with the foreskin restoration? What are you talking
your message regarding this topic?
Yeah, in 20 years, if we had this practice was banned in the United States, like it was no longer even permitted, that would be, I think, be the best outcome. Now, the trick to that is you still have the religion.
But listen, they're trying to close down abortion clinics and women's clinics here. I mean, I just see this as being such an overwhelming task that you're taking on.
This is not the same as abortion, though.
I'm just talking about the resistance to be open to this. What you're putting out there is definitely against the norm. Right?
It's the norm, but I don't think it's as extreme as talking about aborting, abortion.
No, but I'm saying that people aren't open. Like there's a closed-minded section of society that's not just going to welcome all these things, and this is something that it's a hard topic to bring up in the first place. This
is extremely controversial. This is not welcomed. It's highly misunderstood. There's huge amounts of misinformation, but I don't think it's necessarily an impossible feat. I mean, I just think you have to educate people, and you have to do it in the right way. If you're out there shaming people and making them wrong, I mean, that's the wrong way to go about it. We have to come together and have a conversation. We have to figure out, how do we heal the shame and the guilt so that we can move forward? For parents that are like, well, I chose circumcision, so, that's what I chose. And they don't want to confront the inconvenient truth that maybe that wasn't really the right choice. I think we have to have some supports in place. And also for men, to be able to grapple with the reality of what this might actually mean for their lives that maybe they've never considered. And I think there's avoidance around that. I think it's easier to not consider that maybe you did lose something from having your foreskin removed. Maybe you lost more than you realize. And I think that people don't want to look at that, so they avoid it. So we have to have something there. I don't even know, like a healing ritual or something for the men of society for what was lost, and for the women that have also lost out because of that. I really think this is not just a man's issue. This affects everybody in society.
Well, that's a good point. You know what? Listen, anybody that's as passionate about anything as you are about this, bravo, and God bless you for that. I mean, I believe this is. I'm being absolutely serious here. I mean that.
Thank
you. You're a pioneer with this, and it really takes a lot to get out in front of something like this. Whether I understand it thoroughly or not is irrelevant. I'm giving you the props for stepping up for what you really believe in here and getting your message out there against a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to not do what you're doing.
True.
And that's what's great about, you and what you're doing. It's great.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, it's part of pleasure activism, and foreskin is a part of male pleasure and it's a part of female pleasure. And I'm all about making sex and sexuality more pleasurable.
Yeah.
And I see circumcision as getting in the way of that.
You just said something right a minute ago about, women should appreciate this as well. I think that's a big, not to just glance over that comment, because that's a really big thing, that women can understand, the men's issues, and men can understand women's issues clearer. I'm not saying that everyone doesn't, but clearer. Like that, we keep getting clearer and clearer and clearer to
Yeah.
really, really understand.
And I think that we have to understand that this one anyway, men's issues, this is a woman's issue. This is very relevant to women. If you're a woman of childbearing age and you have a son, this is going to be relevant to you. This is something you're going to want to think about before you have a child. If you're a woman who has sex with men, this is a women's issue. So yes, it's about men's rights and the right to their penis and to their body, but the choices, what we do to our men, we do to everybody, just as like what we do to our women, we do to everybody. We're all affected by.
But there's
by
two people, whether you're in a heterosexual relationship or a gay relation, whatever it is. There's two people involved. You need to understand each other, because it's not like, you're bringing yourself into it, but it's the merging of two people, right? So you have to be more open to understand, your partner in whatever. I mean,
Everybody on board. I mean, if you look at like the domestic violence movement, which is that was another movement that I was involved in for a time and really did some advocacy work for. We need men though it's 85% women. There are some men who are victims of domestic violence, but it's 85% women. We need men as spokespeople for that movement as well, to advocate for the women.
You need more men. There are men. There are. I know
Sure.
plenty of men that totally are against all of that, and would be, firmly back you up in your beliefs. They're against domestic violence on any level.
Sure.
I
Any
think
kind
more
of
men.
social justice issue, even if we're talking about racial equality, we
You know
need
what? Fuck all of that. Forget racial equality. Forget gay rights. Black rights. It's human rights, man.
Yeah, it's
It's
human
like
rights.
you don't have to specify. Yeah, I understand when black people have areas, that they're, speaking up about. Yeah, they have that right. Absolutely. Gay people want to, have their voice heard. Absolutely. But really, it should be like human rights.
Yeah.
Women don't need. I mean, yeah, women do need their voice heard. I get it, but it shouldn't be where I'm just going to give you, this greater platform because you're a woman. I should just give you that greater platform because you're a person.
Right. That's a
And
good point.
we got to take all this shit out of the game and just say, you're a person. You got a pulse, a heartbeat, a brain. I don't deserve more than you. I can go out and earn whatever I earn. But when it comes to basic human rights, you should get them just because you're breathing. You should be
Right.
entitled to them because, like, respect. You should get respect because you're alive.
For sure.
Nothing else.
Yeah, but then you still have the problem that that's not happening. So you need a diversity of support from different.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying that ultimately, I'm, in a perfect world, I know it's not perfect, and I know. Listen, I have this argument with people all the time with the Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and and being white, how do you not hear them? And then to come back and say, well, Blue Lives Matter. What the fuck are you saying?
Right.
What does that have to do with it?
Right.
Like, there's a reason why they're up in arms about, behavior that, whatever. And they're protesting. And who wouldn't, by the way? But to say, to come back, with, with the tit for tat thing, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
I agree.
people are reacting. And that's a right that we have as human beings too, to be able to protest, a peaceful protest. I mean, so like, I just don't understand it coming back. Yeah, well, all lives matter. Yeah, but right now it's like, there aren't too many white kids getting shot in the back, for a cigarette. I just
Right.
repeatedly by a cop. I'm just saying, So, and if that was your nephew or your
Yeah.
child or whatever the case is, you might understand it better, but you're so removed from it. And then I had somebody tell me, Blue Lives Matter. I go, blue, you can. That's a uniform. You can take that off. You don't take black off.
Right.
It's not a fair equation. It's just not.
Right.
Like that's so it doesn't. But a woman. For a guy, guys have to understand that women need to be treated and in a decent manner. I mean, that's it should just be given.
Yeah.
But if a woman's not, and the whole Me Too movement is a direct result of not being treated fairly, and then when they stand up and they make their voice, now that has to be done in order to find a medium. You have to go over the top,
Right.
in order to make any progress.
Right.
So
No,
so maybe
true.
it's still not even, but maybe you climbed up a notch or 2 notches or 3 notches or whatever. I think probably a lot more than that as of late.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you think about it, look at all the feminist movement from the late 60s and early 60s, I should say, actually, up. And then we kind of had almost like a decline almost, it seems.
Right. Right.
You know, or at least it's being brought out in a public forum now. And people are speaking up. And, you know, we have the right to do that. And I hate the resistance to protest. I don't understand it so much. It's an inconvenience if it's not your, you know.
Well, it threatens power. It threatens the people in power. It's really what it comes down to.
What's your ultimate objective as, you know, a therapist?
Well, I'm an advocate for women to be able to find more pleasure in sex. And so my ultimate objective is to help women learn how to find their voice and to resolve resentment and guilt and really learn how to become love and to really become architects of love. We have that capacity as women, and I want to empower more women to be able to do that and to know how to do that.
And so do you work with women to get through trauma and to get through conditioning?
Yeah, a lot of it is conditioning, and trauma tends to be just sort of an integral part of our culture. But yes, absolutely. It's a lot of undoing the conditioning.
And how much of it is holistic that in your approach to the healing process for someone?
Well, yeah, I mean, I tend to be very holistic in my approach. Again, like I'm not an advocate of just putting women on hormones or drugs that don't work when that's not the root of the problem. That's something that I'm really passionate about that too. I've just seen way too many women like that are struggling with this desire piece, and they just have pills thrown at them and it doesn't take care of the problem, or they're told, well, women are just naturally low desire. That's normal. And that pisses me off. I've had a case like that, and this poor girl was told by multiple professionals that it's just normal for women to not be interested in sex, and there's nothing that we can do about it. They put her on some hormones, and those worked maybe for a couple weeks, and then she's back to baseline. And really, you know, what it was is like she needed to learn how to use her voice, how to communicate, how to reconnect with her body, how to actually heal some of the conditioning and the trauma. You know, and it's been amazing to see that now suddenly she's feeling the desires coming back online. She's a little more excited and looking forward to sex. Like, these problems can be solved, but we have to know what's at the root of them. And it's usually not, the answer is not just throw some pills at it. Even right. In my role, like, you know, people can come to me as a therapist, like I'm going to solve their problem. Like I'm the pill kind of, right?
Right.
But it's not, it doesn't work that way. Like I am a facilitator, and I may be a detective in a certain way. I help to find what's the root of what's going on. Why is this happening? And then I can help guide and direct on how to resolve that. But people have to do the actual work, right? It's not a standalone thing. Like, oh, I'm going to go home and do this exercise on myself, and then I'm going to be fixed. That just causes more frustration. You know, you have to trust the process and trust yourself, and you have to do the deeper work of sex and intimacy, that's the harder part to do, but that's where the results come from.
Sure. Do you integrate Tantra?
I tend to not use the word Tantra very frequently in my work, only because it confuses people and it has so many different meanings. But Tantra to me is really about union. It's about union and the union of opposites. It's really a deep spiritual practice. So my approach is highly based and informed on tantric principles. But when you say, do I use Tantra, I don't actually know what you mean by that, because that can mean so many different things for different
people. And that's a common misperception. But like the more of the westernized neo-Tantra, like the practices that, you know, for intimacy, enhancement, and heightened.
Some of them I do for helping women to learn how to access their erotic energy and how to move that through the body. Yes, some of those practices I do teach. But again, like, I think that can also be, sometimes I think it takes away from really what I believe is the real juice and the real work is the vulnerability. And like I said, this deeper work of sex and intimacy, which is really about really accessing a deeper place in ourselves and doing the harder spiritual work. of resolving resentment and guilt and using our voice. That's really what I find to be more important than you can learn a technique, and eye gazing is wonderful, slowing, sensual awareness skills, that kind of stuff is great. But just kind of learning how to stay hard for longer so that you can have more orgasms, that stuff I think it can be used, it's sort of empty. Like it's used to kind of fill a void rather than really empowering people with these deeper skills. They can get to that, but that's not necessarily the end game. The end game is really about self-knowledge and dropping into more authenticity and being able to be in more control of our desire and our ability to connect more deeply with ourselves and with a partner.
Couldn't agree more. One last thing. What about breathing? How valuable is breathing?
My gosh, well, we'll die if we don't do it.
So it is important.
It's important, Scott.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That was great. It's great. This conversation was fantastic. Thank you for your insight. No, but like doing breath, do you incorporate breath work in your practice? I mean, that's...
Oh, absolutely. Breath work it's critical. That's the answer you wanted. Well, it's critical in really helping us with some of the embodiment work. When I'm talking about clearing out and doing the deeper work of, clearing resentment and guilt and even confronting fear and being more connected to our bodies, using our voice, all of that requires our breath, which is really what connects us into the body.
But it's an often overlooked practice because it's so obvious that we fail to give it the credence it deserves.
You have to actually be intentional about it, and there's specific practices for different
things. I was intentional about asking this question, damn it.
I'm
just saying.
But yeah, learning how to in the breath is a way to relax, to aid in relaxation, or to also build up. If you tend to be like your sexual motor is kind of slow, breath is a great way to get it going. So if you know that and you know how to use breath to do that, it's a great tool to be able to
also anxiety that comes with intimacy. What better cure for anxiety is it than controlling your breath and really using your breath as an asset.
Right. Breath is huge because the breath also when we're afraid, when we're not feeling our emotions, we're usually holding our breath. And so we've learned to hold our breath when we're nervous or scared instead of when we breathe. What it does, it releases our emotions. And that's where orgasmic energy is all about the flow and the movement of our emotional energy through the body. So the breath is really critical.
Morgan Susan Taylor, this has been a treat.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, you're really enlightening. If anybody is watching this wants to reach out to you and, work with you, learn from you, how do they find you?
Absolutely. Well, I'm on Facebook, Morgan Susan Taylor. You can connect with me there. My website is pathwaytopleasure.com. You can connect with me there. I also have a free ebook. You can grab a copy of that either on my website at pathwaytopleasure.com or at pleasurekeys.com. So that would be great if you want to stay in contact. Grab a copy of the Pleasure Keys ebook, and you'll be on my email list, and I'll be in touch.
Well, and I hope everybody does. This has been a real treat. You're great.
Thank you.
The passion that you have about what you believe in is basically unmatched. You're up there with the best.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's exciting. That's what I think. That's what we need. If everybody can have something that they feel that way about and give the kind of time and insight and work that you put into, what you do, I mean, we'd be in a much better place. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's do this again soon.
Yeah, I'm game. Thanks so much, Scott. This was super fun. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.